Welcome back. This week we're lucky we only have 4 chapters to go, 17 through 20. It's beginning at Division 3 in the textbook, Group and Public Communication. Now, those of you that have read the section probably already know, but groupthink, if you haven't read it yet, groupthink, do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing? And think about that when you read it. You'll find out. We also talk about socio-emotional communication. And what is that? That's communication that deals with more than the facts. You have to deal with the emotions of who you're talking to. You can talk to somebody and give them the facts, but if you delve deeper into it and you look at the socio-emotional communication, it brings you closer together. So chapter 17 talks about the functional perspective on group decision making. And the functional perspective predicts the performance when communication functions are completed. Now, what are the functions? There's analysis of the problem, goal setting, identification of alternatives, evaluations of pros and cons. Now, how do you do all that? Well, you've probably all brainstormed before, and that's when you try to figure out maybe what the problem is, or maybe what your goals are. You brainstorm a lot of times. You do all this stuff, but one thing I want to point out is if you're brainstorming and somebody says, paint the room purple, for whatever reason, it may not be the best idea in the world, but as soon as somebody in the group opens their mouth and says, that's stupid, then they have probably shut that person down and they may have the best idea coming up. So don't do that. Once you go through that process and you figure out, what the problem is, and what your goals are and identify the alternatives, then you have to evaluate what's the pros and cons. So you take all the ideas and you say, okay, these are the pros, these are the cons. This is what we can do, this is what we can't do. So the role of communication is either one of three things. You will either promote the interaction and the interaction will move forward. You'll be disruptive, you'll divert it or hinder it. That's like telling somebody that was a stupid idea. Or be counteractive, and that's where somebody gets the group back on track. You've probably all been in study sessions or something like that, and you're all doing good, and then somebody says something about, oh, that Professor Humphrey, he's an idiot, and then and you all agree with it, which is fine if that's what you believe, But it diverts or hinders the direction the group is going. And then counteractive is somebody saying something to get it back on track. So, reflective thinking recognizes the symptoms. They in the book they use an example that's reminiscent of a doctor analyzing somebody or evaluating somebody. What are the symptoms? What causes those symptoms? Diagnose it. Establish a criteria. This is what we want to do. Get the person well, reduce parking congestion on campus, whatever your criteria is. Consider the possibilities. Test the solutions. Well, we can do this, and this might happen. We can do this, and that might happen. And implement it. One thing that you need to be aware of is that after you implement it, you're going to have to evaluate it and make sure that what you did was right. Discourse ethics is an ideal speech situation. It's ideally this is perfect. And an ideal speech situation has a requirement for access. It means everybody that's involved should have an input. Everybody that has is affected by it should have something they can say. Now, they may not have an opinion at this point in time. That's fine. But you don't want to discount somebody and knock them out of the running just because you don't think they have an opinion. A requirement for argument. Everybody's expected to participate. If there is something going on and it will affect all these people, then everybody should have the right to participate. And a requirement for justification is once you come up with a decision, it needs to be accepted by everybody, not just the people that said, yeah, that's what we're going to do. So when dealing with this stuff, you have to have a bona fide group or a real group. A bona fide group it's not some haphazard group of people that are together sitting out in the gazebo talking about what the weather's like this week. You need to have a bona fide group. But one thing we did in the Army, and they didn't go into a lot of depth in here, was we always called it an after action report. So once you make a decision to do something and you do it, you have to look back. And that's the evaluate the pros and cons that I spoke of earlier. Look back and see what went right, what went wrong, and what can be done to change it so you have less go wrong. Chapter 18, Symbolic Convergence Theory. This one kind of threw me for a loop when I was a student, and the more I looked into it, the more I understood it. And it uses things like fantasies and dramatizing and fantasy chains and these other words. And it was kind of like, oftentimes I wish that they would just use regular words that people are used to. But dramatizing basically is telling stories. When group members tell stories and the other group members have heard them and they understand what the story means, it brings the group closer together. Convergence. It brings you closer. Shared group fantasies create a symbolic convergence. If you're all telling the story of what happened last weekend with whatever football team, it creates a convergence. That was a bad play. The umpire really messed us up. It brings you together. Dramatizing a message is a creative interpretation of there and then. We don't tell, if we tell a story that, yeah, my dog, I got a dog and it went outside and it ran. It's kind of boring, But if you add drama to it, if you create life in it, then it makes it a much better story. Fantasy chains are stories, dramatized stories that were created, and they grow, for lack of a better word. They grow and they continue. If you ever gone to become part of an organization and you hear these stories from 50 years ago or 20 years ago of the old folks and what they did, or in your family, grandma and grandpa stories and aunts and uncles, and when your folks were kids, and the story continues on and grows. That is what a fantasy chain is. It's not necessarily changing the story, but my dad was told it when he was little, and he told me, and I told my son, and my son told my grandson. It continues on. A fantasy theme is content that has chained out in the group. If the funny looking professor is what the theme is, then it's continued and everybody in the group understands it. And the theme, you say funny looking professor, then everybody goes, oh yeah, Professor Humphrey, or blind professor, yeah, Professor Humphrey, or Dr. Humphrey, whatever you want to call him. So that's what a fantasy theme is. It's the content itself that is chained out in the group, and everybody knows what you're talking about. A symbolic cue is a trigger. So I may be the only blind professor you have ever seen or had. But my white cane, if we were teaching in class and you'd see me walk in with it, could be a symbolic cue, a trigger. That anytime you see somebody with a white cane, it triggers, okay, that's a blind person. Fantasy type it is a cluster of fantasies with a shared meaning. That's the way we've always done it. Uh, could be the same as, well, it's historical. That's why we do it that way. Or nobody's going to tell me what to do, and I'm my own man. And those basically are the same thing. They just have different things. So that's a cluster, fantasy type. Symbolic convergence is when symbols become more closely related. So the symbol may be professor. And so y'all have your own vision of what a professor is, what they look like. And so the might get a different professor that wears shorts and a tank top and a baseball hat. So that would be, kind of like we were talking about, mentally, strange and different. But it would add to the symbols. So later on, you might see this. Might see more of those. So now it's converged. These two symbols mean the same thing. Groups with little fantasizing seldom become cohesive, according to the textbook. And I can relate to that. I've been part of different groups, and some of them were tight and close together. We had our stories that we told one another, and others, I felt like an outcast, an outsider, because I didn't get told any stories, and I didn't tell any stories. And so, a rhetorical vision is a composite drama of large groups. This is the drama that we deal with, and by it spreads out in a large group, and sometimes different groups uh, pick up the same vision. Fantasy's theme analysis is a rhetorical criticism used to detect themes. And what does that mean? Well, how do you analyze this? How do you find it? What's the appropriate thing that you're dealing with? And so there's four things it says to look for. Characters. Is there a common, villain or hero that Vern talks about, Bob talks about, Sue talks about, or plot lines? They have the same scene. I mean, the same agency. Are they about the same stuff? The scene is, does it happen at the same place? Is it happening in the same business? Does it happen at the same type of time? It could be time, it could be place, whatever. And sanctioning agent, who says that this is part of this group? Who has that authority to say this is something, a story that we'll tell? So what you want to do is, when you are part of a group, you want to support positive chains. If there's a positive chain that brings a group closer together, you want to share that and repeat it and bring people in together. You want to end disruptive chains. We've all been parts of groups or organizations that had some people that turned out that they weren't very nice and they said something negative about somebody else, or maybe they were using a racial slur that they shouldn't have been using. So you want to end those disruptive chains. And you want to encourage sharing. You want other people to tell the story, because when they tell the story, it brings you all closer together. And sometimes you have to be aware that some chains will make a unexpected turn for a different direction. How many times have you seen a athlete or a TV personality, a celebrity, try to do something, and it got turned around to where it was something else. So you have to take care and be careful watching change, because sometimes change will take a different turn. Organizational communication is the next section. And for years, it was considered top down. You know, the CEO tells this person, this person, this person. Or to use a military vernacular, the president tells the chief of staff, the chief of the army tells the commanders tell the other commanders, comes down to the chain, and people do what they're told. And another thing that they looked at was the machine model. Like, when you're a part of an organization, you're like a cog in a gear in a machine, and you do your stuff, and you do your stuff, and you do your stuff, and you screw up, they'll fire you to put a different gear in there, and they'll do that, and they'll do it, and they'll do it. But they found out through years of research and all that it may be kind of like an assembly line, but people are people. They aren't gears or cogs or springs or switches, and there's a lot more to them than just a part. You know, if a person is feeling really good that day, he might work a lot. If he's feeling bad that day, he might not work so much. If you're paying attention to him, and it's just kind of dark in here, and you turn the lights up, you can see better, then he might work better. So it's not like we are a machine. And so it's kind of been an outdated idea. Chapter 19, cultural approach to organizations. What is culture? You know, that's something we have to understand. Culture is not it's not a tactile thing. You can't go to the store and get a gallon of culture. I have a thing on my emails that I talk about, you know, culture is like a rubber band ball. And in each rubber band is a different layer of things that you've been exposed to and things that have happened to you. And some of them just mark the day, and some of them are wide and comforting. Like when you go home for the holidays and you smell that apple pie that your grandma always baked, or when you get up in the morning and you smell coffee. It's something that makes you feel good. And some of them are thin and painful, like the death of a close family member or something like that. And they're not always the same for everybody. For example, 9/11, which happened a long time ago, before some of you were even born, it was a devastating day for many of the people in the world, in the United States, put it that way. And to them, it's a tight, painful rubber band. My dad passed away on September the 8th. So I was kind of numb, and it was like, okay. They're attacking us. All right. It just didn't affect me. But if you were an Al Qaeda supporter, you thought that was great. Hey man, this is cool. Look what we just did. So it could be different things to different people. And culture is not whole or undivided. We have subcultures even in the look at the United States. If, for example, you live down south your whole life and somebody says something about pie, you may be thinking pecan pie or apple pie. If you were in New York, somebody says, hey, let's go get some pie, they're probably talking about pizza. So, you know, it's not universal. We have different subcultures. So cultural performance is the act of revealing your cultural connections, basically. In the military, you know, I'd salute somebody, and I might see a friend of mine and salute him, and it kind of reveals that I got that from somewhere, you know. We have nicknames for different people in different services, and when a bunch of old veterans get together, we use those names. And I could say, Let's see, hoorah or hoorah. So whichever way I said it, those people in my veterans network would know if I was uh, Army or Marine. So a cultural performance is the act of revealing a cultural connection. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Something that said a lot in the South may not be said as much in other places. When I was in Germany, I mean, you're down south, you see somebody walking down the street, you say good morning. In Germany, I'd say good morning, and they kind of look at me like I was crazy because it's not what they do. Ethnography is studying what goes on. We talked about it in a couple of different chapters, so I'm not going to go in depth here. But ethnographic research is where you are looking at the culture of the individuals, what they say, what they do, how they say it. In ethnography, they talk about a thick description. A thick description is not just, well, he's got a blue shirt on. He has a blue shirt on that has a Rotary on because he's a member of Rotary, and it goes into more depth. It tells the story. It lets you understand it. So it's like we were talking about in the last chapter about dramatization. Thick description is something that allows you to paint a picture. A metaphor is a comparison with a known. For example, rolling off like water off the back of a duck. Or if you were to say, hey, what do you know about such and such? What do you know about rugby? I really don't know anything about rugby. Well, it's kind of like football. Rugby is not really like football, but it's kind of like football. So if you don't know anything about rugby, and I said, well, it's kind of like football, then you can start imagining the shape of the ball, the people on the field running into one another, trying to get from one end to the other. So metaphor, comparison with a known. What do you know in something that somebody compares it to so you understand it better? Symbolic interpretation. Does it tell a good story? Does it tell what you want it to tell? If it's not telling a good story, then why tell it? Corporate stories they reinforce the company line. You know, well, we do so and so and so and so with our donations to charities, and it tells the perspective from the corporate. Personal stories are told by individuals, and generally they make themselves look good. You really don't hear too many personal stories of people that make themselves look bad. Now they might look off a little bit, but maybe it's a funny story and it's supposed to be that way. Collegial stories are positive or negative stories about others in the organization. So it might be, if you go to work at a new place and somebody tells you anytime you have a problem, you go see Bob because Bob will take care of you. Or it could be, you better watch it around Tim because when Tim he writes everything down, he goes tattletales and because he does what we used to call in the army was brown nosing. I don't know if y'all call it that anymore or not. So a ritual is basically something that's done. A lot of times it's like a rite of passage. It's something we do because we've done it. We basically always done it that way, so we're going to do it that way because that's what we do. And can culture be changed? Yes, it can. Uh, should it be changed? Maybe not. Maybe so. After World War II, the German culture changed quite a bit because World War II changed it in the first place. So, yeah, it can be changed. Uh, And actually, to me, the way I look at it is the more experiences you have, your personal culture changes. I grew up in the South. I traveled the world as a child and in the military. And most people say that I don't have an accent. Now, my wife, when we were in Germany, she'd come home and she said, we'd be talking. You've been talking to your mama, hadn't you? Why? Because I'd pick up that southern drawl from being on the phone with mama, and I sounded like I ain't never left South. So culture can be changed, and I believe our culture changes personally when we change our culture, the culture of you. Uh, Organizational culture, it's harder to change, but it's possible. The book talks about a place that was not good to work, and they ended up firing the person that was in charge, and then nobody else came in, and a lot of the people came back because the organization's culture had changed. Chapter 20. Communicative Constitution of Organizations. Now, I'll be honest with you, this was a new theory to me. First time I'd seen it or taught it. And a lot of times I think, why do they have all these big, long words and make these long things? But Communication Constitution of Organizations is organizations are what they are through communication. They believe that an organization is what it is because of the way the organization communicates. A constitution is communication behavior that creates the organization. Kind of like our Constitution created the United States, sense making is communication that reduces ambiguity. A lot of times we hear things that they're ambiguous. When Obama was running for office, it was change. And all the people getting behind him going, yeah, we're going to change. He never said what he was going to change, but he said change and people agreed with it. Trump said, make America great again. Okay. A lot of people jumped on that bandwagon. Make America great again. Like, how far are we going back? To 1776 or to 1865 or to 1942? Where do you want to make it great again to? But it was an ambiguous statement. Sense making is communication that reduces the ambiguity. Flows. Circulating fields of communication. Kind of like how a river flows. And that's the book does a good example of using water as a conduit to see this. So this particular theory, the Communicative Constitution of Organizations, has 4 flows they talk about. They are membership negotiation, communication identifying who's in. What communication goes on to say this person is part of the organization or this person is not part of the organization? Is it a ritual that you have to go to? Is it a swearing in process? Is it where you met with these 10 people and they ask you all these questions and they said, okay, you're in, like a fraternity or a sorority might do? Self-constructing communication shaping the relationship. So when we start talking to one another, the relationship starts getting shaped. I had a professor at University of Southern Miss who was Korean, and I'm older than him. So his name was Wojung Chung, and so I'd call him Dr. Chung. And he said, no, Vern, you call me Wojung. Because in his culture, that we talked about last chapter, it was appropriate for me to address him by his first name because I was older than him. And I said, no, I'm not going to get in that habit because in class, I will call you Dr. Chung just like the rest of the students do. And I don't want to call you by your first name and then end up doing it in class and then people look at me funny and da-da-da. So our conversation shaped that relationship. Closure is a sense of shared understanding. So he and I had closure after that conversation when I told him that I understand your cultural upbringing and how you believe things are, and I don't want to change that. But on the other hand, my cultural upbringing is that I'm a student, your teacher, and I'm in your class, so I will call you by doctor. Activity coordination is communication directed at completing the goal. It's pretty simple. Hey, I'm going to do this, you do that, you do the other. You make the PowerPoint, you do the presentation, I'll do the research. Whatever the conversation happens to be that allows you to actually coordinate the things you need to do to complete the mission of the goals. Institutional positioning is communication between outside organizations. All the other stuff was the flow, other three flows, the membership, negotiation, self-constructing, and activity coordination, all happen inside the group. But institutional positioning is how the group connects with in outside organizations. How do we, do we donate money to this charity? Do we provide time to this charity? Do we buy this commercial time at the Super Bowl? What are we doing to position ourselves as a group? Now, with the four flows, there are four principles that go along with those four flows. And the first one is that all four flows are necessary for an organization. You can't have an organization if you don't have all four of them. Different flows happen in different places. When we're talking about membership flows or activity coordination flows, they may not happen in the same place, or institutional positioning. So they could happen in different places. The same message can address multiple flows. When you're interviewing somebody for a position in your organization, you can say that we're really a progressive organization that does this. And then when you're trying to position yourself institutionally, you can say we're a progressive organization that does this. The same message, just different people in different times in different places. Different flows address different audiences, which is the last one. Diverting the flow. How do you change the flow of something? How do you change the message? How do you change the self-constructing, shaping? When it's kind of like when Dr. Jung and I were talking, I diverted the flow. His flow was I'm Korean, this is how you'll address me, and my flow was, no, I'm American, this is how I'll address you. So we diverted the flow, we changed the direction of the flow. Co-orientation is when two or more people focus on a common function, a common item, a common mission, a common goal. So we're working together. We're trying to get this done. That's co-orientation. Self-sufficient conditions are conditions where something will happen. Necessary conditions are conditions where something can happen. So we just had a hurricane come through northern Florida. We got one out in the ocean right now in the Atlantic. It might be looked at it this way. Necessary conditions are the ocean temperature has to be above 96 degrees. There can't be any crosswinds coming through, and you can have a hurricane. But sufficient conditions where something will happen, is you don't have the crosswind coming in, you have the temperature above 96 degrees, and there's a low pressure sitting in the Gulf of Mexico. So you have everything you need, and something's going to happen. The storm's going to build up, going to get worse, that type of stuff. So necessary conditions is where something can happen. We can do this. So that is, in a nutshell, chapters 17 through 20. Once again, I apologize that I'm not going in depth, but for me to go in depth, my videos would be 6 hours long, at least for each chapter. And the idea of this course is to give you an idea, an overview of these theories. And your paper at the end of the semester, I haven't told you all about this in depth yet, but you will pick a theory and you'll write a research paper on it. Tell me about the theory. And the details will be on Cougar View by the end of this week. I didn't want to rush ahead and give you that information and have you look at the theories before we went over some of them. Some of them may have tripped your trigger and got your interest, and this is what I want to do. That's great. You've had a preview of some, you've read the book on some. None of them may be what you want to do yet, and that's fine too. So make sure that you read the chapters, make sure you watch the video of my outline, make sure that you comment on what I say and comment on two of your peers. And I'll see you again next week. Have a great week, folks. Well, I should say you'll see me again next week because I don't get to see you. Bye.